Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, I'm going to be discussing a true classic in the chronicles of the strange and bizarre, and that is the terrifying tale of the Tallman Bunkbeds. So, just a personal note here. This happened just a short distance from where I grew up as a kid in Wisconsin. And another thing, when I was little, I loved watching reruns of Unsolved Mysteries. Might explain a lot, I don't know. And I remember that this segment actually terrified me, because again, it occurred in a town that not only had I heard of, I had been to, and just thinking about that for some reason, you hear that it happens in your state and you're like, okay, well, that can still be a ways away, but when it's in your vicinity, there was just something about this story which really frightened me. Also, too, the concept that it did introduce that, maybe houses aren't haunted. And even though it kind of was just an extension of like, well, maybe objects are haunted, that still was just, my mind was blown when I was a kid and I heard the terrifying tale of the Tallman bunk beds. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, before much further ado, I guess, there's something I want to say, and that is just, in my videos, I really tend to focus on these occurrences as like single events, or events in a very short period of time. And so that's why it is true, in looking over my videos, I've realized I haven't done very many episodes on hauntings. So, or even like, poltergeist activity, that sort of realm of spectrology bordering parapsychology. And, part of that is because I do really like doing a deep dive into these different kind of events and occurrences, which is really easy to do with, say, like, a Bigfoot sighting. Even though a lot of people who see Bigfoot may have had other experiences, whether it's UFO encounters or, yeah, poltergeist phenomena or hauntings, it's really easy to pinpoint, like, Doc Priestley's encounter when his car went out twice on the same road and he saw a Bigfoot each time. Whereas with a haunting, and even with, this is kind of the Tallman incident is considered more in line with poltergeist phenomenon, it happens typically kind of over a broad period of time. Sometimes it seems like the phenomena kind of builds or it sort of waxes and wanes. And so I guess that just, this is sort of an open call. If you guys want to see more haunting type phenomenon videos or even more poltergeist videos, let me know in the comments because I definitely feel like I have been neglecting spectrology, which is a huge oversight on my part. So yeah, just tell me what you guys want to see. Now, without further ado. As may be suggested by the title The Terrifying Tale of the Tallman Bunkbeds, this tale revolves around the Tallman family, who in 1986 moved into a house which had been built 2 years previous in the small town of Horicon, Wisconsin. Before that, the land had been marshland, which is pretty common around Horicon, especially given the world famous Horicon Marsh, which is a great place to go hiking and bird watching. At the time, Deborah was pregnant with the couple's second daughter, and she also had a son from a previous relationship. So, in Norman's Haunted America, the Tallmans claimed that things began to go downhill right away. Just kind of health issues, people were on edge, just general bad luck. I'll return to that concept later on in the episode. However, the first actual event which they believed was unexplained occurred to a babysitter before November of 1986. She claimed that as she was playing a board game with the 7-year-old boy, this chair nearby started rocking before bouncing around the room and then coming to a stop. However, strange events really kicked up when two simultaneous events occurred in the middle of 1987. They decided that their new baby, who's by now 7 months old, could move into a room with their 2-ish-year-old daughter. And at this point, they purchased the by now infamous haunted bunk beds. Now, surprisingly enough, the activity at first didn't really revolve around the bunk beds. As a matter of fact, it revolved around the 7-year-old son, who had moved out of the room in which the bunk beds were now placed. One of the first things that he noticed was that the clock radio switched stations. And I know what you're thinking, it could just be electrical interference or something like that. He actually said that he could see the knob turning as though from some unseen hand. Then he heard noises like someone banging on the water pipes in the basement. And this is a pretty simple debunk. Water pipes make a lot of crazy noises. Until Alan later heard the same thing. And when he went into the basement to try and figure out if it was simply the water pipes, he couldn't find any problem, couldn't replicate that noise. When the water heater kicked on, it just made a low kind of whirring. Now, the pièce de résistance and what really frightened the child to the point that he didn't want to sleep in his bedroom anymore was that he had a suitcase which slid out from under the bed, kind of moved around a little bit, and then slid back under it. Around this time as well, all members of the family began having severe nightmares, and their middle child was claimed that she would wake up in the middle of the night and hear shushing noises, like someone was in the room going shh, 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 to calm her down. So, although Deborah began believing that there was something strange with the house around this time, Alan held out until September of 1987. The turning point for him was when he was painting the basement, and he left to put the children to bed. He said that he left the paintbrush kind of on one of those paint trays so that it wouldn't drip into anything. When he came back downstairs about half an hour later, the paintbrush had moved from where he had left it across the paint tray to somehow being suspended upside down in the can of paint, with a wooden handle in the paint and the bristles up. So he saw a shadow flitting around the basement at this time, tried to brush it off, and went back upstairs. However, shortly thereafter, the basement window was actually removed and set against the wall, like someone had come into the home. However, nothing else was disturbed, and the Tallmans couldn't figure out how the person would then get back out of the home, considering they would have to set up a chair to get back out through the window. So yeah, just object displacement and weird things like that going on. In October of 87, Alan took a promotion at work, which meant that he would be working the night shift, leaving Deborah and the kids alone in the house until 1 or 2 in the morning. One night in late October, Alan, who was suffering from a severe sinus infection, became so ill that Deborah actually called his mother to come watch the kids while he was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Much like the babysitter, a year earlier, when Deborah and Alan returned to the house from the hospital, Alan's mother was ready to leave. She had her purse, her keys, she was ready to get out of there. Later, Alan asked her about it, and she said that the night he had gone to the hospital, she had dozed off in the living room. When she woke up, she saw red eyes looking in the window. She blinked, and they were still there. At this point, she stood up to look out the window, and the lights completely vanished. And there was nothing outside which would have caused them. No car, no one, playing a prank in the nearby bushes, nothing like that. The next occurrence of note once again involved the now 8-year-old Tallman boy, who shortly before Christmas claimed that he woke up and saw a strange figure standing by his bedroom door. He said that she appeared to be a creepy old woman, about 3 feet tall, with long black hair, and that she glowed like fire. Deborah told him it was all his imagination and just to go back to sleep, but he claimed that 5 minutes later, she had returned. Now, it was around this time that the Tallmans decided to have their house blessed, but if that would have worked, this would be a much shorter video. Several days after the blessing, the boy was allowed to sleep in the living room with the Christmas tree because he was so frightened of his own bedroom. And he was actually in sight of his parents' bedroom. They slept with the door open so they could keep an eye on him. In the middle of the night, he called to say that the bizarre figure had again returned, standing by the tree just staring at him. Deborah came into the room to look, but she saw nothing. She returned to her room, and 5 minutes later, he called to say that she was back, and freakily enough, bigger. Deborah ran out again. Again, the vision vanished. When it returned for a third time, she remained in her room. It was at this point that the son began screaming, asking what the being wanted, telling it to go away and leave him alone, to which the thing only stared in response. Finally, Deborah came into the living room to make sure that he was all right, and she found that it was like her son was paralyzed, yet wide awake. Incensed by the futility of the blessing, along with the implication by the pastor that demons were to blame for the manifestations in the house, Alan yelled just to the house at large that whatever it was that was in there should leave his kids alone and come after him. According to the Tallmans, that seems to be exactly what it did. It was at this point when Alan began experiencing the extremely vivid and distressing nightmares. However, one of the first events of note occurred in early January as he arrived home from work at 1 in the morning. As he approached the door, he heard a gusting whistling noise come from the direction of the garage, and as he touched the door to open it, he heard a voice call, "Come here." He looked around and no one was there. Now he went back to the door, was trying to open it up when the howling noise started up again. And as soon as he was nearly inside, he again heard the voice yell, louder this time, "Come here." Now the noises seemed to be coming from the garage, so Alan looked in the direction of the garage and claimed that he saw flames gusting out of the garage along with glittery green-red eyes floating in the doorway. Alan first was so frightened that he actually just ran in the house and closed the door behind him, but then he realized that, hey, it appeared his garage was on fire, so he went back outside to check on it. When Alan went out to the garage to see if it truly was on fire, all the manifestations were gone. So he went back into the house, locked the door behind him, and picked up his lunch pail, began walking to the bedroom when he claimed that something came up behind him and hit him, sending the lunch pail just kind of ricocheting across the room. He immediately retreated to his bedroom where once again he heard the same howling, whistling noise, although Deborah, who was wakened at this point by the disturbances of her husband's lunch pail ricocheting through the kitchen, didn't hear anything. Less than a week later, Alan was lying on the floor of the girls' bedroom until they went to sleep. This was something he had taken to doing since the manifestations had first started. And both girls fell right asleep, which apparently was kind of odd. Alan was about to get up and go to his own bedroom when he heard the same high pitched whistle that he had experienced in the garage. He claimed that a mist rose up from the floor and became a pillar of fog that stretched between the floor and the ceiling, then transformed into a humanoid shape which contained the strange red-green eyes that Alan had seen in the garage. Suddenly, a hand kind of came up out of the humanoid misty figure, pointed at Alan, and said, "You're dead," before moving towards him and vanishing in a flash of light. Again, the family introduced a barrage of blessings in the house, which seemed to work for some time. However, as in the previous time, the good vibes quickly vanished. One evening, Alan was at work, and his teenage nephew was staying with the family. He began screaming for Deborah. Apparently, the nephew had taken over Alan's spot on the floor of the girls' room and was starting to drift off himself. The door to the room was open, and he could hear Deborah washing dishes in the kitchen. Suddenly, he was awakened by the younger girl jumping up and calling, "Hi there!" He looked and saw a hovering human figure, which moved towards him and said, "Now you're involved," very ominous, before dissipating. Now, this was the turning point. The Tallmans vacated the house, eventually signing it over to be sold. The police, particularly Chief Glaman, also became involved shortly thereafter through rumors of a haunted house in Horicon. Chief Glaman spoke to the family and was impressed with the notion that they had truly been through something terrible. As to what it was, he wasn't sure, but he believed that they believed it. Later attempts to figure out the phenomenon focused on searching for secret projectors set up by some unknown individual with a vendetta against the Tallman family. And even later, natural gas and carbon monoxide poisoning were ruled out, especially when the owners of the new house claimed that nothing was amiss and were in perfect health. So then, as well, was the infamous Unsolved Mysteries episode. And just as a side note, we're not really going to get into all of the stuff that came with that because something I've noticed is kind of the more notoriety a case gets, the more scrutiny is kind of placed on the initial witnesses. And, you know, obviously people argue, well, they just wanted attention. That's why they came up with this, crazy story. In my opinion, in most of these cases, first of all, there's no way to know which story will really garner attention. And you have to really weigh, is any financial benefit that they got from, say, Unsolved Mysteries, is that worth having to relocate out of the home? Is that worth selling the house and, not making any money off of it? I just, I really don't think that's a super viable option, especially because in many of these cases, a lot of witnesses really don't want that notoriety. But again, we're not really going into that side of it because I am much more interested in the phenomena that was reported. Now, just to be fair, I will actually put out there that I do think there maybe was a little bit of room for some debunkery in this case with some of the less dramatic manifestations. Specifically, the one that I can't close the book on is the banging noises. Um, Pipes do make strange noises. Plumbing is the most unexplained thing in the world to me. The entire genre of the paranormal and unexplained pales in comparison to the magical mechanism of plumbing. So, yes, I know that Alan went down to make sure that nothing was amiss and that everything was running smoothly. Who knows? Pipes have a mind of their own. So, I'm not ready to say that was or was not paranormal. I think there's a little room for reasonable doubt there. The other thing is the chair bouncing around. Um, I think that, by and large, Wisconsin is not known for having earthquakes. However, micro earthquakes do happen sometimes. That's all I'll put out there as a possible debunk for that. Otherwise, again, I tend to think that it was probably anomalous simply because of the broader spectrum of bizarre things that were happening to the Tallmans at the time. So, with those little disclaimers, this has been the Scully segment of the show. Moving on to Mulder. This case is so intriguing because it is considered a really great example of kind of poltergeist phenomena or object attachment. And I think that's something too that, is really odd. They really blamed the bunk beds. They were secondhand bunk beds. I don't know what the backstory is with them. Were they built by some sort of, I don't know, person who was in league with the spirits or what? Um, but yeah, the Tallmans really blamed the bunk beds. Now, again, I think that two simultaneous events happened at that time. They moved rooms. Their son was in the room, which was larger, and their daughter was in the smaller room. Now, when they decided to have both the girls move into the same bedroom, they switched the son to the smaller room and put the two girls in the bigger room with the bunk beds of evil. Anyway, so, really, I am not sure what effectively kicked off this phenomenon. I have the same question with UFO encounters. I have the same question with Bigfoot encounters. Sometimes you'll have what appears to be a flap going on in an area. We can kind of make sense of that. Do we know what sets that off? Not at all. But hey, if five other people see a UFO in one area, a sixth person, it's just one more witness. But with ghostly events like this, I think people really do try and look for like where would this have come from because we have such a strong concept of haunted houses, of places being haunted, and that's kind of spread into objects being haunted. However, was that the trigger? There's no really true hard and fast answer for that. To me, there's also the concept, a lot of people believe that poltergeists are simply caused by kind of pent up energy. Maybe there was just familial stress going on. Maybe the, bad luck which the Tallmans experienced wasn't caused by, whatever strange business was going on. Maybe the strange business was caused by the bad luck. Again, it's kind of, it's very circuitous trying to figure out, what caused what, chicken or the egg, the stress causing the haunting causing the stress. And again, yeah, I don't really know if there's a clear cut answer for it. As far as the manifestations themselves, though, there's definitely a lot of very interesting stuff which happened to the Tallmans. One of the first things which stood out to me is the bizarre whistling noises which Alan heard before the visual manifestations. I know I've mentioned this before in line with especially Bigfoot encounters and with some, quote unquote UFO occupant encounters, where it seems as though noises almost prime the witness for seeing and observing an anomalous manifestation. And here you can clearly see that Alan, the event where he was coming into the house, he first heard a whistling, gusting noise and then a voice. That happened twice before then his lunchbox was whacked out of his hand. Then again, when he was in the bedroom, he heard the same whistling noise before seeing the bizarre, misty apparition. So to me, that really does call to mind, is this something that's almost tripping our internal wiring to see or to experience these anomalous activities? Another really odd thing about the strange whistling noise is that he mentioned it sounded like gusting wind. Now, bizarre anomalous winds are another really weird aspect, which are associated a lot of times with UFO sightings. People say that it's like the trees were moving or it's like the grass was moving when they see a UFO. This is also tied to, again, one of my favorite things, the fairy faith, where they said the good folk would often ride on the breeze. So it is just weird to see that here in this kind of, ghostly or poltergeist type manifestation. While on the topic of it, though, a lot of hauntings include the feeling of a cold draft moving down the hall. Now, another really cross boundary part of this encounter, this series of encounters, has got to be the disembodied eyes, which were witnessed by both Alan's mother and Alan. Now, to me, this is one of those things which is just so prevalent in whatever branch of the paranormal you're interested in, whether it's cryptids with glowing eyes or the prevalence of eyes in UFO occupant encounters. And here again, we have these disembodied eyes, which were seen first looking in the window. Now, to me, it's just so interesting because, again, this is a very classic, kind of modern poltergeist haunting type case. Yet the eyes looking in the window is identical to so many accounts of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, especially the stranger ones with the glowing red eyes, which is exactly what Alan's mother described as seeing. It's just that in this case, there was no accompanying, hairy hominid. It was just these strange disembodied eyes looking in the window. While on the topic of eyes, this brings up another, frankly, quite unnerving aspect of many different types of paranormal phenomena, where the witness claims that whatever the entity is that they're looking at, whether it's some sort of cryptid like Bigfoot or, a so-called UFO occupant, or many times, yeah, like ghostly manifestations, these beings, whatever they are just kind of staring at the witness. Um, it really is quite unnerving. And the odd thing is that, we think so often of, again, I just did it myself. We refer to the people in these situations as the witness. They are witnessing some event. The freakiest thing is when it seems like the event is witnessing them back. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the terrifying tale of the Tallman Bunkbeds, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with whatever else I might possibly have going on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.